Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today for our webinar on using photos as primary sources for National History Day projects. I'm Ellen Dornan. I'm the state coordinator for National History Day, and we're being joined today by Hannah Ablebeck, photo curator at the Palace of the Governors, and Daniel Kosharek, who's the photo archivist at the Palace of the Governors. I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you for joining us today, Hannah and Daniel.
Hello.
Nice to be here. We'll flip it though. I'm the photo curator and Hannah is the archivist. So,
sorry, I'm so sorry. So tell us a little bit about your jobs and what you do there at the Palace of the Governors.
Well, I'm the photo curator, so my job is to work with the archive to produce material for exhibits and press releases, brochures, catalogs, that sort of thing. We have over 1 million photographs here in the archive. We run a rights and reproduction service, supplying images to people all over the world, really, Japan, France, London, as well as across the US. So it's a big job, and there's only 2 of us, but we manage.
And I'm an image archivist, and I do a lot of the, grunt work, working with images, image files, finding things for people, answering questions about the archive.
And we sort of share the duty of working with researchers who come into the archive, dealing with particular subjects.
Well, as we've discussed, our National History Day students use photo archives to a great extent for their projects. And so tell us a little bit about what you hold in your collection.
Well, like I mentioned, we have 1 million photographs, and it sort of runs the gamut of the history of photography, from the very earliest photographs, cased images, all the way up to digital prints that were made last week. So there's a very wide range of material, focusing primarily on the West and New Mexico. But in addition to that, there are all sorts of other interesting material here, like the Syria albums and lots of Mexico photography, hand-painted photographs from Japan, that sort of thing.
So it's not just a New Mexico history collection. You've got a number of different historical and modern collections.
But primarily New Mexican, Southwest, West, Native American, that sort of thing.
I know personally I've always gone through your New Mexico history photographs, and there's some real treasures in there. So I'm fascinated that there are so many more collections. If a History Day student wanted to access your collections, how would they go about doing that?
Okay.
So there are 2 main ways. The first and probably easiest from where they are is to search online, and I can put up the page really quick, or not. Never mind.
Or I can. Here, let me go ahead and switch this. Pull it up beforehand. Okay. So now everybody can see your digital collections here. It's econtent.unm.edu/CDM.
That's the New Mexico digital collection.
That's the whole page.
Sorry, that's the link that I had. So should I?
No, that's correct. So
okay.
this page is hosted at the libraries at the University of New Mexico, and there are many different institutions across the state who have put content on it, and we're one of them. So one way you can search is through this interface. You can search everything, or you can just search within our collections. And I see that you've checked the box there for New Mexico History Museum, and a lot of our stuff you'll find there. So we probably have 25,000 images up there, which is quite a lot, but it's actually a small portion of our collection. So this is a good place to start. It can give you a little survey about what's out there, If something is easy to find or is very popular, it's often on there. But it's probably maybe 2% of our collection at the most that's on there. So this is something that's easy to use remotely. But if you've tried this and nothing's coming up, or you still have a lot of questions, we have many, many more photographs. And to access those, you'd have to probably visit us in person or at least email or call us.
Right. The online collection probably, for the most part, represents the rarest, the most at-risk material primarily, and then it expands out from there, includes things like the Pinhole Resource Collection, the Santa Fe New Mexican, Jesse Nussbaum, Parkhurst, Ben Wittick. So those collections split up a bit, but primarily it's the most interesting material we have.
Could you tell us a little bit about those special collections, the Jesse Nussbaum and the Pinhole collection? And
yeah, so well, the oldest collection where we have a lot of material is Ben Wittick collection, and most of that is 1880s and 1880s. Yeah, we're having some sound issues. Are you having sound issues?
I can hear you. You're in and out a little bit.
Yeah.
You want me to search for one of these collections? Is there something I should type in to pull it up, or?
If you type in, Ben Wittick, it should work and pull up a bunch of stuff.
Ben Wittick, like that?
2 T's.
2 T's.
Oh, okay. Oh, try this again. One more time. Wittick.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, wow.
So these photographs all have the citation material with them, the photographer, the date, subject matter, most of the time what the original is, a negative or a and also on that site are the forms to order photographs and to request permission to use. Links for that on the bottom.
So right down here at the bottom of each page?
Right.
So if a History Day student wanted, say if they wanted to use a copy of this 9th Cavalry Band on Plaza photograph, how would you recommend they go about doing it?
Well, there's a number of ways they could go about using it. It primarily ends up what the end use is. If it's just going to be a student paper and they can use the image, the low resolution image that's on the website, they're free to use that as long as they carry the citation information. If they need a high-res image for a publication or a wall graphic or something, then they would have to fill out the order a photo form and the request permission form, and there are fees associated with that.
Can you just give us a rundown of what those fees would be?
400 DPI high-resolution scan is $25. If you were going to print it in a book, a catalog, a brochure, or something like that, there would be a $25 permission use fee. With students, we do give discounts. We do give quantity discounts. Nonprofits get a discount. So we're easy to work with.
So the History Day student should, I guess what I'm taking away from this is they should use what they can for free, the low-res images to the extent that they can, along with, yes, we require proper citations too.
Yeah.
For every image that they use, it needs to be cited in, remember students, cited on the page or under the exhibit. But if they're doing a documentary or they want a very high-res image for their exhibit, then they'll go through your permission process, request the discount for the educational use, and maybe be very, because there is an associated fee, maybe be selective about which photographs they pick to use in the high-res.
Yeah, if they decide they need a high resolution scan, they should fill out the order and permission form and then send an email to the email at the bottom of the page that just basically says, "Hi, I'm a student at such and such school. I just submitted an order for something I'm going to use," and then we can evaluate it.
And that is
It's if you go to like
the order link down here.
Yeah, at the bottom there'll be an email on that link.
Oh, okay, at the bottom of this link.
Yeah,
This photo order form.
Mhm.
Here we go. Photo archives at state.nm.us. And
Yeah,
I'm guessing
just
Hannah
send it-
gets that.
Oh, what happened?
Oh, it's just the email.
Is that the one?
No,
It's just wild mousing.
okay.
Yeah.
And about how long, because not that there are any History Day students that push things until the last minute, but
No, I'm sure not.
what kind of lead time should they give you, since it is just the two of you working in the photo archives there?
Minimum of 2 weeks, and it's probably better to do 4 or 6 weeks.
We sometimes get swamped with very large orders that are time sensitive, and that just kind of really slows everything down.
Right.
That happens frequently. Actually, we have 2 very large orders on the table right now, and those are paid orders, and the big large paid orders sort of take priority because it's the money that comes in through rights and reproduction that supports the archive directly.
Right. So considering that these projects are going to be due come March, that they should make these requests by January. Okay.
Unless they can use them as is off the website, then they're free to
Right.
grab them when they can.
Right.
One thing to mention when you are searching online, it is keyword searchable. So if you're looking for a particular image relating to a certain subject, don't give up if you just type in cavalry and nothing comes up. You know, type in band, type in gazebo, type in plaza. There's a lot of different ways to get to an image.
Well, can we try a search right now just to see what comes up? So I'm going to go ahead and search for buffalo soldiers, because I know that that's a great subject, especially for this year, talking about conflict and compromise.
Right.
So I'm coming up with a ton of stuff. And is there a way to look through all the results of your search?
Yeah, if you go back to the thumbnail page, it'll display, I don't know, 20, 25 per page, but see you have 3 pages there of images. If you, no, what happened?
Hang on. I'm trying.
One thing that's important to note right here is that this image that you have up right now is from UNM. So you should also pay attention to what collection it is in, because this is...
All right, so here we go. So here's where it shows which collection we're using.
Right.
So let's try going back to the search and narrowing it to, let's see. Oh, I see. So it's unselect all and then just look at the Palace of Governors. And you have a bunch of different collections here, it looks like. Oh, I see. So would you advise somebody search all these collections at once?
It depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes it's really helpful to search all the collections. Sometimes you get way too many results, and then it's not helpful. One that you might want to uncheck is the newspapers collection, because you get a lot of words in newspapers, and that brings up a lot of different pages. So I think it's under New Mexico
newspapers database.
Yeah, that one produces a lot of results that, if you're looking for images, aren't very helpful.
So I have a question here. I've got the Palace of the Governors collections selected here.
Mhm.
Is there a submit or something on this pop-up, the refine your search thing?
Okay at the bottom.
Okay at the bottom. Oh, I can't see it.
Mm.
There we go. All right. So these are the, so let's see, let's quick display options. And I think, yeah, I think we want the thumbnail, but it can be displayed differently. So these are great. Do you want to tell us a little bit about these collections that you have? We've looked at the Ben Whittick. It looks like it's got lots of great New Mexico history things. Are they different eras or?
Yeah, so Ben Whittick is going to be between about 1880 and 1900. He worked for the railroads and then lived in the Gallup area, so you'll get a lot of general New Mexico images and also a lot of western New Mexico, which is kind of nice.
A lot of Native American.
A lot of Native American studio portraits. The Jesse Nussbaum collection. Nussbaum lived in Santa Fe, and he worked for the Museum of New Mexico. So a lot of his stuff is probably around 1905 to 1920 for the most part, and a lot of it is around 1910 to 1915 during statehood. Lots of just documentary pictures, especially of northern New Mexico, portraits of people, that sort of thing. The T. Harmon Parkhurst collection is very similar. Parkhurst also worked for the museum and did a lot of documentary photography. His stuff is 1920s, 1930s, into the 1940s. The Pinhole Resource Collection is maybe not as relevant for history students, but it's a very interesting collection that focuses on a photographic process. A lot of that's very contemporary imagery. And then the last one is our general collection, and it has about everything in it.
So it's worth searching them all, even if you're not sure that it's within your time period.
Yeah.
Well, I would say certainly those the older collections and the statehood collections, the collections around the time of statehood, seem like they would be rich resources for History Day students working on New Mexico topics.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to direct this question to both of you, although Daniel, it sounds like this is more sort of what you do in your line of work, but when you're setting up a historical exhibit or when you're setting up, when you're trying to storyboard out a documentary, how do you decide? I mean, I just searched for Buffalo Soldiers and I came up with so many good pictures. I could spend all day trying to decide which ones to use. What are the criteria that you use to decide what pictures to use?
Well, there's a number of different criterias. First and foremost would be whether or not we're going to use the original photograph. If we're going to display original works, that limits the field a bit because a lot of photographs, maybe we only have a glass negative or something like that. So that's one thing. And the other element is that every exhibit has to tell a story. So you pick images that tell a story and a specific story. So that's when you got those two elements in place, it's fairly easy to work through it. And then it's size, and do you want one maybe that has an outdoor landscape photograph? Do you need a landscape? Do you need a photograph of a building? So you just start filling in the blanks.
So the photographs of the buildings or the landscapes or whatever, that would be to sort of set the context of what the topic of the exhibit.
Right, and then sometimes exhibits are pretty straightforward. Like we just took down an exhibit Monday called Sleeping During the Day, Vietnam, 1968. So that's pretty specific. So all the photographs in there related to that particular topic. So then it was a matter of, do we have too many photographs of just a person, one soldier? Do we need a photograph that shows what their equipment looked like, what the buildings look like? So then you just kind of figure it out.
Well, so it's important to, I guess what I'm hearing is that it's important to have that whole story in your head before you go, and not sort of build it around your favorite pictures, but have that story that you're trying to tell in your head.
Right. Well, but it does. We also do things that are favorite pictures. You know, I mean, sometimes an image is so spectacular that it warrants its own exhibit or its own place in an exhibit.
Well, I know
Yes.
you have one huge picture there in the History Museum of the 4 Pueblo leaders in DC with their ceremonial canes. And I know that's one of my all-time favorite pictures. We used it for last year for taking a stand in history, because I think it just tells such a story. So the looks in their eyes and the way that they're standing and that they have their canes, it's fantastic. But tell us a little bit more about how pictures can tell a story. Do you have some examples for us of how students can sort of grapple with telling the stories of these pictures?
I do, but they're on a window, and I'm not sure how to. Oh, I found it.
Okay.
I think I got it. Hold on. Before we move on from telling a story, I just wanted to show students. I mean, a lot of people who use photography use it to show something or to illustrate a person, but you do have to kind of think critically about the stories those tell. If you want a picture of Albert Einstein so that people have some idea of what he looked like and who you're talking about, this image of Albert Einstein is very different than this image of Albert Einstein. They say different things about who he is and what he did. And the other thing is that you kind of have to be careful online about photographs and how they're talked about, because there's a lot of misinformation out there too. This is an example of a photograph that is miscaptioned a lot. It says, "This is Albert Einstein with his therapist. This Albert Einstein is very different looking than this Albert Einstein." But also, this is not true. The caption is inaccurate. So sometimes you have to do a lot of work, especially for images that are floating around out there. And even some in our collection, we don't maybe know as much about as we should. You need to do a little work to make sure that everything kind of seems accurate and that you're using sources that tell an accurate story about the pictures. So that's just an example I had.
I think that's solid advice for any primary source.
Yep. So I'm going to show some more examples from our collection. If I can find them.
And I would say to students while you're looking for that absolutely, whenever you're retrieving any information, any research online, be sure you're retrieving it from a reputable source. And if you have questions about photographs, downloading the image and re-uploading it to Google Images can sometimes help you find the original source or archive.
So
uploading it as an image search. Sorry.
Yeah. Can you see this one of 3 men?
Yeah, it looks great. Who are they?
Well, the man in the back is Sobotka, and the 2 guys in front are his sons. He's a major figure in eastern New Mexico. He's credited with founding Santa Rosa. So this picture is kind of great because if you're doing your research on that area, you can talk about him and the role he played, but it also is, sort of a great character sketch of maybe what kind of person he was and that sort of thing. So portraits can be really, really varied in what they communicate and what they show. Here's another portrait.
The fact that he gets a chair and nobody else gets a chair, right?
Exactly, right. Here's another portrait. This is the wife of a New Mexico state historian, and what's interesting in this picture is not just that she's in it. In fact, you maybe can't even see her very well, but the interior space in this photo is so interesting, right? It communicates a lot by how people lived in their houses and what they might have been working on. You can see on the right side, there's some sort of early machine. Not sure if it's a dictaphone or a recording machine. Like sometimes there's really interesting things that you can find in photographs depending on how you look at them.
And the very old-fashioned telephone to the left of her.
Right.
And the window.
Yep. We have a lot of portraits. This is a really early portrait of Navajo leader Manuelito and his wife Juanita. So some of these photos, you know, if you look at this, you can talk about the relationship between people. His brother is also in the photograph. He's standing with a man who might be in the military or an Indian agent. And those things are very important as well, how people are framed together and what that communicates about what was going on at the time.
Do we know where this picture was taken? Was this at Bosque Redondo or was this?
This is afterwards. This is probably 1872, maybe a little bit later. I think it's at Fort Wingate or Fort Defiance, but I'd have to look and see if we know for sure. Here's another portrait that's really colorful and tells a story. We actually don't know who this man is, but he looks like a character. He has a wooden leg and he's sort of careless about how he's holding his firearms.
For a moment, I thought it was Buffalo Bill just because of that luxurious fringe and the fur collar he's got.
It's that mountain man look from the early period, you know. A portrait like this is really interesting too. This is probably a late 1930s photo. It's John Candelaria, and you can tell less about the woman, but a whole lot about her setting. I mean, look at all the advertisements that are in the window, and what it would be like to be, you know, in this town, going to this store during this time.
Well, I would say it's an interesting picture of the woman. She's wearing pants.
Yeah.
And she really looks like she has a devil may care kind of pose there. So, I mean, who is this woman that was so liberated in her dungarees back in the day?
Well, lots of women wore dungarees in the 30s. And
Dr. Pepper?
There is a Dr. Pepper sign there and a lot of tobacco ads. Yeah, we don't know who this woman is. And, you know, sometimes if you find a really interesting portrait and you think that there's enough there to follow up on, sometimes you can, with a lot of work, figure out who it is or who it might be. There are other photos, you know, we have of people doing things. This is a photograph of Navajo men laying railroad track. Oh. So a lot of photographs in our collection are devoted not to just where people lived and what they looked like, but what projects they were working on, how people, you know, harvested food, for example.
Do we have a date for this photograph?
It's probably before 1945, but I couldn't tell you for sure. We don't have an exact date on this one.
I love the little girl poking her face in from the corner. That's very cute.
Yeah, it is really nice.
We'd call it photo bombing now, right?
Exactly. You know, this is a photograph of a boy who is probably working with animals most of the time. So not only can you see like what people are working on, but, you know, sometimes their relationship to, and this would be, you know, with animals, that can be kind of interesting. Here's kind of a similar thing. This woman is a school teacher, and she's probably standing by a new school building, and you know, she has a little baby burro with her.
So, you know what, let's hang on to that picture just for a second. So, I mean, what can we tell, even if we don't know the date exactly? And just looking at her dress, it's very different from what we see in the earlier one. And the landscape looks like it's maybe out on the plains or something.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're not sure where this one is taken, but we do know a little bit about her. And, you know, something that if you're working with images, you start to get into is to answer some of those questions. Sometimes you need to ask other questions. So, you know, who owned this photograph at one time? Sometimes we have a record about that. A little bit about her, and she worked for, I think, the Indian schools, the Bureau of Indian Affairs schools. And it does seem like she visited schools around New Mexico and maybe the broader Southwest. So this is probably in New Mexico, but it could be in Arizona.
Oh,
and
just out of curiosity, there's that strange brush pile behind her. Is that stacked wood or a?
I think it would be firewood for school, or, you know, maybe fence posts. You know, material for fencing. We don't know, and that's an interesting question that you could ask about a photograph. I don't understand.
It is an interesting picture of early school life. I mean, it looks like she's being blown to pieces out there. That's her bonnet behind her getting blown off.
I think so, yeah.
And you know, just stacks of firewood for keeping warm, if that's what it is.
Right. Other photos tell really good stories. You mentioned the Pueblo Canes photo that's in our lobby, but this one is kind of related in topic, but it's a very different way of looking at the same subject. This is a meeting between representatives from the U.S. Congress and leaders at Northern Pueblos. They held this meeting at Tesuque in 1920. And they were talking about, at this meeting, they were talking about the very same land issues that they were talking about when they traveled to Washington, D.C. and posed for the photograph that you mentioned.
So this was around the Bursum bill, the bill introduced by Senator Bursum to take away Pueblo lands and award them to homestead.
Right. Exactly, yep. Let's see, what else do we have?
Look at that cool buggy. It's a great picture.
Yeah. This is Silver City, I think. They're driving cattle in town. It's kind of neat. It gives you a great, you know, sense of scale about what the place was like then, and cattle was a major industry.
So is that the ditch behind Main Street now?
I think so.
Just an arroyo?
Yeah, well, the ditch behind Main Street is where that huge flood took place.
Right.
And now the town is built right up to the edges of the ditch.
Right.
Yeah, you could do a little research and, you know, figure out if it's the same arroyo or a different arroyo.
Interesting thing about photographs like this would be trying to figure out what compelled the photographer to take a photograph of cattle, which was probably a very common scene there. You know, so just speculating on why that photograph was taken.
Right, because you wouldn't go to the trouble to take a photograph if it were anything unusual.
Right.
You mentioned John Candelaria earlier. Was he a photographer, a photojournalist? Was he with the WPA?
He was a photographer. He was from New Mexico, and, you know, took photographs during that era. He did not, I don't think, work for any of the federal projects, but the style does seem very similar.
Mm-hmm.
We have a huge Candelaria. We have his entire archive here.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. And so that's all early 20th century.
Well, 30s primarily
40s.
40s, yeah.
Oh, neat. Oh,
but
neat.
he captured a lot of personalities from that period of time.
I bet. I bet.
This
So tell us about this. Is this a bridge or a ferry? It's a bridge.
This is a ferry. This is
It's a ferry?
yeah. This is a Ben Wittick photo of the international border between Mexico and El Paso,
Oh, wow.
probably in 1880. And you know, a photograph like this can tells you a lot about how people moved around. You know, the opportunities that they had and where they might have gone in order to catch a ferry.
It also tells you something, that there was a lot more water in the river in those days than there is now, because down there now you can walk across there.
Wow. Wow. Well, and it looks like they've gone to the trouble of making the ferry pretty permanent looking. I mean, it looks, it doesn't look as much like a boat as it looks like a stable crossing.
Yeah, these were tollways, you know, so people built these, and then they made their living charging to ferry people across.
My understanding is that the water level fluctuated a lot, so the ferry had to be rejiggered a couple times a year for different lengths across the river. This might be a low point. And they were replaced by bridges in the 1880s, and that changed things too when you have a permanent bridge rather than a ferry.
I always thought it was interesting and significant, the lack of bridges in New Mexico for so long, because you think of those as government investments, and it says a lot about the nature of the government during the territorial period, and even earlier than that, that they weren't investing in that kind of transportation infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, that this was in private hands.
Yep. This photo I find really compelling. This is a feast day at Taos Pueblo, probably in the 1880s. The feast day is, I think, tomorrow. It's going on this weekend. So this event still continues, but you know, how people arrived and what they expected to see when they got there was quite different at this point.
Well, it's interesting. You can see all the people coming with their parasols and things. You know, it's clearly, I mean, to me, at first glance, it looks like a very genteel gathering. You know, the people coming in their carts, they look like they're dressed up, maybe, with their nice parasols and their hats and their good wagons.
Sure. Yeah. I also think there was probably a lot of partying. Other shots, we have a lot of landscapes. I mean, we've been talking a lot about photographs with people in them, but we have other ones that don't have people in them at all. And it gives you a very different perspective on, you know, how towns were arranged and how many people were living in an area and how the land was being farmed and that sort of thing. So that's another thing that, you know, students could look at if they're doing research.
Right.
You mentioned investment and things, and you know, we also have a lot of railroad photography. Sometimes photography is also about maybe not how people lived every day, but the events that they thought were important. And you know, here's an example where there's some event happening, you know, around this train, and you have a whole bunch of people posing with it, quite deliberately, right? This isn't a candid shot. They all climbed up on the rock so that they could be in the photo.
And they all look pretty proud about it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's another similar kind of image, you know, where people are gathered for a photograph to commemorate an event that they at the time thought was really important. The New Mexico Central Railway was a big deal when they founded it, but it doesn't exist anymore.
I think we're going to wrap it up here pretty shortly, but I did want to ask, what advice would you give, just the best piece of advice would you give to students if they start researching through your website and they they're struggling to find what they're looking for. Is it using different keywords like you suggested? Is it contacting you all? What should they do?
We get a lot of research requests for people who say, I was on your website and I'm looking for this and I can't find it. And as Hannah mentioned, the online digitized collection represents about 2% of the photo holdings we have here. So if you're not finding what you look for, just send us a note and say, I'm looking for a picture of Sobotka. Do you happen to have one? And we can do a little research and tell you. So that's the simplest thing, is just send an inquiry, whether it's us or the National Archives or Library of Congress, just send a note. Our researchers are there to help folks out.
But also to be aware that you all are have other time constraints besides helping students, right?
That is true. I had someone in this morning who wanted to do research on civilian conservation corps camps, and we didn't get very far because a lot of those photographs were taken for the federal government. So they're in the National Archive. So sometimes it really involves a little digging and imagining about who would have been there with a camera to take the photograph. And then where would that photograph have gone? Is it in a family album that someone still has in their house? Is it in Washington, D.C. because it's part of a federal government program? You know, there's a lot of questions that you can ask and think about if you're not finding something, are you looking in the right place? And it involves imagining the history of documents and the history of photographs.
And when you send us queries like that, also like somebody will send us a note and say they're looking for a particular building on 6th Street in Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. We don't happen to have it, but we can then tell them, well, the Albuquerque Museum has nothing but Albuquerque photographs. So why don't you check with them? Somebody looking for ranching photographs around Mesilla, New Mexico, we can send them to NMSU library. So we can help people sort of figure out where they need to go if we don't have it.
That's incredibly helpful. Well, I guess I'll let you get back to filling your huge orders, but thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today and to share all this valuable information about looking at these photographs, about accessing these photographs for research, and then being able to look at them critically. So it's just been so helpful. Thank you so very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I wanted to remind everybody that next Thursday we'll be hosting Jennifer Goss from the Anti-Defamation League. She'll be talking about the Echoes and Reflections program and using accessing primary sources around Holocaust topics. And then the following Thursday, we'll have Kim Fortney, who is the Deputy Director of National History Day, who will be with our regional coordinators, Luisa Castillo and Aaron Gokul, and they'll be hosting an Ask Me Anything. So whatever questions you have about History Day, take that opportunity to quiz Kim Fortney about it. And thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Take care.
You too.